Good morning, friends. As I think everybody here knows, I'm Howard Hawkey with the Adult Religious Education Committee. And as happens sometimes, we're the ones who plan and sometimes facilitate the forums at 10 o'clock. And as happens sometimes, what we thought was going to happen this morning fell through. So we said, what should we do a forum about? And I just said a random phrase. I said, well, how about Quaker scientists? Okay. By the way, there's actually a Wikipedia article about Quaker scientists, and there's and they list about 3 or 4 dozen people throughout Quaker history. But looking at that list, I can think of half a dozen people, many of them of my personal acquaintance, who aren't on that list. So I know there's a lot more to talk about, and I see at least one person here. I see Bill Jeffries, who's an astronomer, and I can think of a bunch of other people that I know. I'd kind of like to get started by just mentioning 3 historical figures. Well, one of them is contemporary, actually, and maybe we'll start with her, Jocelyn Bell. Jocelyn Bell is a Quaker from the UK. She's originally from Northern Ireland, and she was this, and by the way, within the last 10 or 15 years, she was the clerk of the Central Executive Committee of FWCC. So she's a pretty active Quaker. And she's well known, it's almost a folk tradition now about her. She's become kind of a feminist icon in some ways. She was the person who, as a graduate student in the late 60s, I believe, discovered the first pulsar signal known. And the way, one of the ways she became a feminist icon was that her thesis advisor got the Nobel Prize.
And not her. It all very well.
Yeah.
I remember when she discovered it, and she discovered it. He did not.
She did. And in fact, as I recall, Bill, is it not true that he said, "Oh no, this signal, it must be some kind of an artifact," and
he poo-pooed it. He poo-pooed it.
Typical.
And then he got the Nobel Prize, and she didn't get recognized for that reason. He put her second on the paper, as I recall. I think that those of us that were around at the time, as I was, were, well, not happy, shall I put it, that she got as little recognition as she did. She should have been a co-winner of that Nobel Prize. And it just was not fair. She's been very nice about it. She's not, she's been very Quakerly and all that, but she deserved that prize.
She actually has a statement, I'm going to get it wrong, the exact wording, where I think she said, I think I've had more fun than I would have had if I had gotten the Nobel Prize. That's the thing she said. And she said, and I've got plenty of prizes and awards since then, so I'm okay.
Oh, yeah, she certainly is okay from that point of view.
She's very gracious about it, and I think, and like Bill said, I think there was some Quakerly attitude in there too about it. But she's had a long and distinguished career as an astronomer, and I don't know much else to say about her. I don't know, Bill, do you have anything else you know about her, or can?
Well, I know she's been very active in UK Friends Society. I'll also mention that when she discovered all this stuff, I was fairly new to the game. I had come just a couple of years earlier to UT, And I will also remind everybody that the chairman of our department, Harlan Smith, was a member of this meeting at the time, and until he passed away. I guess it was around 1996, as I recall, something like that. Not sure exactly when it was, but.
And Bill, was Chuck Seeger also a member of the astronomy department? And was he not a member of the meeting? I may have that wrong.
There was a fellow who was Charles Seeger.
Charles Seeger.
Yes, okay, just Charles Seeger, who was not a member of the meeting, but he did attend the meeting along with his wife at the time. He was not in the department. He was not a professor in the department. He was the elder brother of Pete Seeger. He was the first child of Charles Seeger Sr. His actually was Charles Seeger Jr. He was born around 1915-ish. I'm not sure the exact date. It was close to when my father was born. And he had Pete Seeger and John Seeger were his brothers, and then he had a couple of half brothers and sisters born of a second marriage between his father and another woman whose name I don't recall. Most of them went into music, and Charles was basically the only one who did not go into music. He went into astronomy. He helped us to build the telescope, the 107-inch telescope that we were building at the time that I came to Texas, and which is out in West Texas. But he was not a member of the department, and when the telescope was finished, he eventually moved on to New Mexico, I believe it was.
Okay. Yes.
I could add something about her as well. To quote, the humility that she showed by not receiving the prize, and the fact that she said she could have more fun is kind of characterized by the fact that when she first identified the pulsar, she named it LGM-1.
Oh, Little Green Men, yes.
That's correct. I forgot about that. That's correct.
They didn't know what the signal was at first, and it was so regular. You know, there was a little bit of excitement for a few moments there when they thought, wow, this might be, you know, some kind of an intelligent signal, right? Yeah.
That's what people thought. And then it turned out that the signal slowly, the pulses slowly slowed down.
Oh.
In other words, they're not constant, but they do slow down very, very slowly. And this is because of changes in the characteristic of the pulsar itself. Which is all physical. So now we understand all that. But at the time, yes, you're right. She called it LGM-1. That's exactly right. I'd forgotten that.
Wow. So I'm going to mention a couple of other, and this is sort of from memory. Another astronomer who's from the other end of the 20th century, Arthur S. Eddington,
Yes.
who, and Eddington is so famous as an astronomer that a lot of people didn't know he was Quaker. However, some of the important parts of his life are probably linked a little bit to being a Quaker. For instance, he's the one who led the famous expedition. And by the way, today, I think today is the anniversary of that eclipse, that famous eclipse where they got the first time there was some sort of observational evidence that Einstein's theory of relativity, the bending of starlight by the sun, and of course back then they did it by waiting for an eclipse and then looking at stars that were near the line of sight of the sun. And Eddington was the co-leader of the expedition that went to the middle of the Atlantic to observe this. And
I don't think it was
And
the middle of the Atlantic. My recollection it was in Africa, but I could.
you're right, it was South Africa. I was thinking of, there were a couple of expeditions that went, one of them went to St. Helena, but you're right, it went to South Africa. And and one of the reasons he was on that expedition was because he was a conscientious objector.
That's correct. That's correct.
In World War I, and and so as kind of alternate duty, they said, well, his university said, look, we really need him, so can you not put him in jail? So, and then they came up with this expedition. And of course, by the way, we are, today is the 103rd anniversary of that eclipse, May 29th, 1919. And he, of course, by then the armistice had been signed, but the expedition was already set up and they did it. And there was some controversy at first over the accuracy of the observations and some of the other aspects of the expedition, but that's since been vindicated. And he was also one of, and this is also probably part of being a Quaker. We forget because World War II and the Holocaust have overshadowed the fact that Einstein in World War I was considered a German. He was an enemy, and so Eddington said, no, the theory of relativity is the theory of relativity no matter what. And he was one of the first, I think he even maybe did some translating of from the German into the English. And he also was the first person to really rigorously suggest and wrote a long paper that I actually used to own a little Dover reprint of it. I don't know what happened to it, where he came up with, because up until then people knew the Earth was really, really old, because they could tell from geology. But the problem was they couldn't figure out any mechanism for how the stars, like the sun, could last long enough to allow the Earth to be 4.5 billion years old, and to have life evolve. So there was a lot of a problem, because no one could figure out a mechanism. And Eddington was, I think, one of the first, if not the first person to, he looked at E equals mc squared, and he said, well, there's a lot of energy there. Basically said, well, maybe what's happening is that hydrogen is fusing, in these stars, and he wrote a long paper about it. So I'm not sure if he was maybe Bill knows. Were there people talking about that before then, or was he the first person to really nail that down?
Well, I do recall, by the way, that eclipse was not in South Africa. It was in southern, let's put south central
Southern
Africa,
Africa.
halfway
Okay.
up. I just looked up the particular eclipse and just verified it. The fact of the matter is that they did do this, but they, from the hindsight that we now have, looking at it over 100 years later. I guess it is over 100 years later. Yeah, it is over 100 years later. The actual accuracy of the observations that were made of that eclipse were not as high as people thought, and they really did not prove that general relativity was correct. Of course, now we have much more accurate observations by many, many different means that do this. But at the time, they thought they were doing more accurate observations than they, in fact, were making. So it was a little bit inconclusive viewed from hindsight.
Gotcha. He wrote a little doggerel. He wrote a long parody of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and the end of it is a little a quatrain that I can't remember the exact words, but it's about the observation of the eclipse. And he said, "So near the sun, the light does not run straight, and this proves to us that light itself has weight." And that was the ending couple
Actually, it's kind of interesting that even without relativity, you should get solar bending of light. The thing
Yeah,
that's
does Newtonian mechanics also predict
yes, it
bending, but
does.
not the same amount, right?
The thing that's different is yes, the relativistic prediction is twice as great as the
Gotcha.
Newtonian prediction would be.
Gotcha. So, and Eddington is famous for a lot of other things having to do with math and physics. And I forget what he was really a very deep cosmological speculator, and became kind of a household name for some of his popularizing works between the wars. I think he died in '44. But he was one of those people that speculated what would have happened if some of the atomic weights had been different. Would we have the same universe? That sort of thing. He was that kind of guy, that would think about those things. And I'm going to mention one other person, and I'm going to ask first an odd question. How accurately do you think we know the length of the border between Colorado and Wyoming? And do all of you have an image in your mind of the map there? Colorado and Wyoming are rectangles, right? So how accurate do you think we have a measure of that border? Probably pretty accurate. You go from one point to the other and you just, measure the distance and you're done, right? Or a lot of places in the United States, the Minnesota-Iowa border, it's a straight line, so we know what that is. Although on both ends, they're anchored by a river, which could shift a little bit, I suppose. Okay, now, how accurately do you think we know the border between, say, Belgium and the Netherlands? Or France and Germany, the length of that border, okay? Think about how that looks on a map, okay? They're all squiggly lines because they're determined by natural features, right? Rivers and such. There was a Quaker physicist and mathematician known a lot for some of his meteorological work, also a conscientious objector in World War I. His academic career was derailed because once you refused to serve in World War I, you weren't eligible then for appointment at places like Oxford or Cambridge or anything like that. So but he managed to have a long scientific career after that. While he was serving with the Friends Ambulance Unit, the famous Friends Ambulance Unit in France, he did a bunch of mathematical work regarding the weather, okay? And was the first person to suggest that there might be ways of predicting the weather other than just looking at what had happened before and kind of thinking about it. So he spent a lot of his spare time, we can only imagine what that was like, on the front lines in the Quaker ambulance unit, saying, I'm going to see if, given all the data that we had from all the weather stations, I can figure out what the weather would have been on a certain day in 1910. It was in the past, but it was like kind of a test. And so of course, back then everything had to be done by hand. But he did that. And but at any rate, he also got very interested in the mathematics of conflict because he was a Quaker. Okay, and he wrote a fairly famous book called the Statistical Analysis of Deadly Conflicts. All right, and he for one thing he showed that, and this is just a distribution thing, and it has to do with lots of different natural and social phenomena that, like let's say earthquakes, for instance. The distribution in terms of numbers of how many small earthquakes you have versus how many really huge earthquakes you have. Obviously, there's a lot more really small earthquakes than there are really huge earthquakes. And he showed that law applied also for conflicts. So he did a lot of time going through information about gang wars in Shanghai and Chicago. This was back in the 1920s, so a lot of stuff going on in Chicago. About the intensity of different incidents, conflicts around the world, wars, and then one of the other things though that he had this hypothesis that the length of the border of a country with other countries might be one of the factors in how much conflict there might be between those countries, i.e. the longer the border, maybe the more tendency to conflict. That was, I think, his initial hypothesis. So he went about, so he went to the almanac and went to the atlas and started looking up countries, and he found out that he got different sources gave him wildly different figures for the same border. Like I think Belgium and the Netherlands, it said, oh, their border is 800 kilometers, and another source says, no, it's 1,200 kilometers. And it turns out, and so then he got to looking at like the coast, and this is famous. There's a famous paper called "How Long is the Coastline of Britain?" And so there's and I'm not going to use visual aids, but think, okay, everybody can imagine, the map of Great Britain there, the big island, and so roughly. The roughest approximation of the coastline is to say, let's just draw a triangle around it. Okay, measure that triangle. Okay, well, we know there's little dips and, things sticking out and stuff like that. So let's try to capture, let's draw lines between those promontories and into those bays. But they're still straight lines, but we do get a larger number. Okay. But it's really more bendy than that. So let's try to get the bends in. So we get the bends in. But then if you zoom in with a map that's got a larger scale, you start seeing, oh yeah, but there's a little cove or a little inlet here, and you go down, and you can go down to the level of the grains of sand along the beach if you wanted, right? And the interesting thing is that as you go in, you just keep getting a bigger and bigger and bigger number for how big the coastline is of Great Britain. And at first, intuitively, you would think, those of you know, that I do, I know a little bit of math and calculus. I know about limits in calculus, where you get, you gradually approach a value, but that's not what happens. It just gets bigger and bigger. It doesn't, it keeps blowing up. So, he discovered this, or he first wrote about this, and that's actually what was picked up half a century later by Benoit Mandelbrot when he wrote a paper called "How Long is the Coastline of Britain?" And that's what got us started in the modern field of fractals. So that was Lewis Fry Richardson, and
okay, say that name again, because I was not familiar with the name.
Oh, Lewis, Lewis, Fry Richardson.
Okay.
And you can look at him, fascinating career. So he was, I forget where it was. He started working, so he got interested in meteorology. He thought that was a good pacifist thing to do. And so he did these calculations. He said there should be a way to mathematically calculate the weather, and then he said let's imagine a huge theater. It goes all the way around. There's no stage on it, and the very top of the theater, the very seats in the top represent the Arctic. The very seats in the bottom are the Antarctic, and in the middle, we've got seats. And there's a computer, which back in that day was a human being, sitting in each one of those, and they've got responsibility for one little cell on the world, on the world's surface, and then there's somebody feeding information to them about what's going in and coming out, and they're communicating with the people on the other cell. And in theory, we should be able to predict the weather that way, and they never built this theater. But then Richardson discovered that that manufacturers, first he, his work was starting to be used by the Air Ministry, so he quit, because the Air Ministry, that was, and then he also discovered that some of the research he'd done on turbulence and things like that regarding this was of use to chemical weapons manufacturers. So he immediately quit doing any more research and destroyed all his notes and everything he had about it, and went on to other endeavors. He was a resourceful guy, and he had a lot of other interesting things to work on. He became what's called a mathematical psychologist. Mathematical psychology was his, So that's Louis Fry Richardson. So I've named 3 people, I guess, from the 20th into the 21st century, and there are tons and tons of other Quakers in the sciences. I can think of several of them that I guess I know. I mean, we know Bill here, and yes.
I'm going to have to take this. Sometime, and Bill, this might be a question for you, between 1985 and now, there was a cosmologist from South Africa, George Ellis. He came here to our meeting.
Oh, cool.
And also, much earlier, Mariah Mitchell, who was the first woman astronomer, and taught at Vassar when it first opened. She was a Quaker, but the Quakers disapproved, the Nantucket Quakers disapproved of her taking young ladies and girls out into the fields of Nantucket to study nature because they thought she was doing science. She said, no, I'm just introducing them to the wonders of God, of God's creation. But anyway, she finally gave up on the Quakers and went to the Unitarians.
She also discovered a comet called Miss Mitchell's comet.
Right.
Yeah.
Miss Mitchell's comet is a comet that she discovered that is named after her.
I was not aware that Mariah Mitchell was a Quaker. I, of course, knew about her on Nantucket. I'm trying to recall the name of the South African astronomer that visited us. I offhand can't bring it up.
George Ellis.
George Ellis, yes, okay,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and then I'm thinking of just other people that we've had come through. We've had people like Ben Kuipers.
Mm-hmm.
We've, people forget, and is Barbara's still there. Otto Hoffmann was trained as a physicist, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Barbara. I know he had some things where he wanted to go into acoustics, and then he realized it could be used for sonar. How did that go, Barbara?
Well, all that I know, and I guess if I peruse more of his papers, I might find more, but he had his master's in choral directing, and at UT he was going for his PhD in music, physics, and architecture. And when the government, so the government, so we're getting in the war, Daddy was drafted, became a CO, went up north for the camp where he did hands-on building. And the second half, I think he had to put in 6 years. The second half, he was at a men's psych facility. And I actually have a journal he wrote. And I took notes for my siblings. Some of it was just random stuff, but he used it in school and for his own personal thoughts, which was very enlightening. But I think the experience in the psych hospital kind of gave him a little PTSD because he wanted to save everybody and he couldn't, But when he was at UT, the government said, we want you to work for us with sonar. And Daddy felt that was going to be for the military, so he dropped out. He refused to do that part. Yeah. So when he encountered, Mother tried to save everybody, and I learned you can't do it. And I always tell my students, pick 2, maybe 3 charities, focus on that, and let other people pick the others. You can't do it all. So that's what I do, 3 or 4, that's it. But Daddy, when he went over to Germany in 1950 to meet up with Mother, and they got married before they got home. I'm not sure they planned that. Okay, but this other guy wanted to marry Mother. But anyway, his experiences over there post-war, even 4 years, was pretty traumatic. And when he came over here, he was not the mover and shaker like Mother, but he was more withdrawn in the worrier of he sees suffering and he just quite doesn't know how to handle that. So he did a lot of philosophical talking, but it really, really bothered him. And he did dwell a lot on the men. I don't know why so many men would have PTSD before the war was out, because World War I was, and World War II, they were 20 years later. So I'm not sure, maybe he didn't have that many patients, but because Daddy was tall, you know, he was in charge of the physical corralling and restraining, and that bothered him. He had some really good talks with the patients, and he felt very close to a couple of them. But that's kind of, I know that he and Bill and Jake Pickle and Cactus Pryor got in a lot of trouble. They got in trouble because of stuff Daddy did, but basically that's all I know. Daddy was a sweet boy, right? Not, but that's all I know pretty much about his schooling. There are a couple of dissertations or interviews he did. And I did make a Facebook page with Daddy, and I recently made one with Mother. If y'all wanted to look, maybe I can research more and add some more to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
So you're going to say something, Terry?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is I wondered if John Dalton had been mentioned.
No, we hadn't got out of the 20th century yet.
Okay, you're going backwards.
Well, no. There's a list of Quaker scientists on Wikipedia that, just from my knowledge, is incomplete. It's got like 3 dozen people on
Just to
it.
mention Dalton.
Yeah, go ahead.
Perhaps the earliest really prominent Quaker scientist was a chemist and physicist, and I must confess I really don't know that much about Dalton's contribution.
I think
what I really wanted to say is what I'd be really interested in is the reflections of Quaker science on the relationship between the Quakerism and the science. Is it a help? Is it a hindrance? Is it in conflict? Is it a support? And if anyone has some first-hand comments, like perhaps from Bill, or second-hand by way of conversations you've had with Quaker scientists or writing, that's what I'd really like to know.
I will tell you that of the 3 folks I kind of highlighted, all 3 of them are on record as having given lectures and writings about the very the very question you're raising. I think I can't remember which one. I think Eddington actually gave a Swarthmore lecture, and maybe Bell did too, on Louis Fry Richardson also gave public lectures on the relation between his faith and science, and his science as well. I don't, again, just throwing this together, I thought put a little bookmark in it and thought, gee, I want to check those out. Kenneth Boulding, who most of us know as a Quaker, he was a scientist as well, and he also gave a Swarthmore lecture on the relation between science and faith. Yeah.
Yeah, Howard, we talked about George Ellison along the lines of Terry's question. I mean, I really like reading some of his more spiritual work because his science work is cosmology, which is the beginning of the universe. And so he's had several books, lectures, or many books on that particular topic and how his particular spiritual core relates to his science, which I think is fascinating. I've got a couple of them. I'll bring one in.
Oh, that'd be great. Dalton is known, I think, he was from the 18th century, and chiefly two things that I know of. He was one of the first persons to kind of foreshadow the modern theories of chemistry, you know, and the atomic weights and the atomic theory of matter. And also a completely different field in a lot of languages, including Spanish. The normal word for color blindness is daltonism, because he was a researcher into that phenomenon. Daltonismo in Spanish is what? Color blindness. Color blindness. Dalton. It's a rather obscure word used in English, but in Spanish and other languages, it's the main word for color blindness. They call it daltonismo, because he researched that and what that was, and I think maybe even some of the genetics involved. Any other thoughts? We kind of been all over the map here, but or some other personalities that you can think of.
I had a quick question of Barbara, just to fill things in for me. Remind me of why it was that your father went over to Germany after the Second World War. Do you remember?
When he went with a couple of friends to hear Albert Schweitzer at Aspen, Mother was also there. I always thought they met there. They didn't. They both wrote into like a Fellowship of Reconciliation type of periodical, and somebody there saw both of their letters and decided these two people should meet. So it's them. But when they finally got together, this one guy was chasing Mother. We got to get married. And Mother said, okay, I'm visiting a friend in Texas right now. When I'm done here, we'll meet up. That never took place because Daddy lived on the farm. He had just gotten divorced, and the woman took his two babies away. This was very traumatic for him and affected our family because of that situation. But he was building the organ for his own church in Kyle and donated it, and his wife got mad because he's not making any money. So she went back home to Maryland. Anyway, so Daddy was in between women, and he encountered Mother, and they met up, and she was staying with him in Kyle at the ranch, at the farm, cotton farm, and experiencing all this, but she had not gone home yet after the war. Very traumatic, of course. So she said to Daddy that she's going to go to Germany, check on her family, who's alive, who's dead, whatever, how the situation is. Her father and her brother survived, and her brother got married and had a little girl. And so Daddy said, okay, he signed up for I think it's the Coast Guard, whoever. That's when UNICEF and Heifer started post-war 46. So Daddy signed up for the Heifer Project to take cows to Poland. That was the initial premise of the organization, my favorite. And he never got called because they had volunteers and all. but he was curious and he wanted to go check. And mother said, okay. And of course they copied all their letters, so I've got those. And she's already over there visiting whoever is left and checking the place. It's pretty traumatic too. And she wrote Daddy and said, okay, if you want to come over here, you pack this exact stuff, and this is how you get over here, because he's not well traveled, and certainly not out of the US. So she told him to the T how to do it, good German. And he went over there and he was, of course, shocked. And they spent time over there, got married, Quaker wedding. His mother was Quaker before Daddy, I think. Quaker wedding at, I thought it was at the meeting. It wasn't. It was at a relative's house. And they were married by the time they got back here. And Daddy felt very comfortable in the Quaker environment because as a Baptist, that wasn't cutting it. It spoke to his thinking and his philosophy. So that's why they stayed put. And plus, mother, you know, anybody going through such trauma, she was shot at, jumped out a second-story window, lost people, you know, such trauma. You either get close to your religion or you get farther away. And she wanted a peaceful group of people she can talk with. And that's what attracted her to Quakerism. So she and Daddy had a lot of philosophical chit-chats, and they were comfortable. And I appreciate that, because that's how I feel. I could be myself, sorry. So it bothered him. And of course, all into civil rights in making sure, but mother was more the doer. Daddy was more, he agreed, but he was also so busy working. Always gone, always gone. So not a good thing, but he had to do what he had to do.
Thanks.
Okay.
Wow. Well, maybe someday we can have a forum where we actually look at some of those Swarthmore lectures and I believe even Pendle Hill pamphlets that some of them have written, and get a little bit more into that. Bill, I know we did a forum a while ago. Chip facilitated a forum a while ago on just astronomy, you know. And you talked a little bit about how maybe your Quakerism and your professional activity had intersected. I don't know if you have some closing thoughts on that.
Well, you know, I was introduced to Quakers very early in my life. My father was an Episcopal clergyman. And he came back from the war having served as a chaplain. And he was not happy for a good deal of time with the church at the time. And we moved out to Doylestown area in Pennsylvania and started attending the Doylestown meeting in about 1947. And that was my introduction to Quakers. When I was in high school and could drive sort of later on, I did attend meetings that I could drive to outside Philadelphia. And in college, I attended the worship group that was on campus at Wesleyan. Met a wonderful person there, friend of mine all of my life since then, till he passed away. His name was David Mcallister. He was a an anthropologist. He was partly of Native American ancestry, and he spent a lot of time out in New Mexico, Arizona area working to record music of Navajo people. And later on, he retired and moved to Massachusetts. We used to visit him every summer. Wonderful man. But it was people like that that brought me into Quakerism. And when we moved to Austin, we weren't attached really to anything as a couple. But Sue and I realized that the Quakers and the Unitarians were the only people who were doing anything at all about the Vietnam War. So that's when we started attending the Friends meeting, in Austin. And I'm not sure exactly how that has affected my science, excepting, of course, that science requires truth-telling, and Quakers requires truth-telling. So maybe that's the connection. Have we lost the meeting? I don't see them there.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, you're right. Looks like we have.
oops. Well, in the meantime, this guy found me through my cousin. Just small world, but my cousin referred him to me. They are restoring one of Daddy's organs in San Marcos. And so I, shared a lot with him, and he says, and I live in Taylor, northeast of Austin, and we still have an organ of Daddy's here. The others are gone. One he moved, but he didn't build. But the others are gone, but the one is still going. And that's pretty cool. But anyway, they're restoring one. They said they admire that organ so much, they're restoring it, updating it, but keeping the most they can. And I think that would really please him. Daddy hated electric organs. Oh my gosh, electric organs are just horrible. I have this accordion. None of us can play it. My son's rather talented. He said, let me have it. I said, okay, I know you'll be able to pick up. He's very talented. But no, he gave it back. And I don't know what to do with it. Maybe one day a grandkid will learn to play it. I can't even it's too small for me. I can't even get my hand in it. I have trouble with my ADD really bad. And it's hard enough to recall words. But doing 3 things at once with an accordion, that's hard for me. I can't do it. I just don't know what to do with it. Well, okay, what do you want to talk about? So, so Bill, Carol Brown? Do you remember Carol Brown? She's kind of like me, about the same height, long braid.
I don't really recall her.
Okay, she did a year in Budapest and she taught music. She recently retired. She lives in McAllen, Texas.
Mhm.
And Larry and Joanna and I went down to see her to protest putting up the wall on the Butterfly Center, which they didn't pay attention to us at all. They screwed it all up. But we've been in good contact with her. Very happy to